She stood frozen in the darkened hallway, her hand pressed flat against the cool stone wall, as her husband's words cut through the silence like a blade. The library door was slightly open, lamplight spilling into the corridor, and she could hear every syllable, every careless breath. My marriage, it is a duty, Ashby, nothing more. She knows her place. A soft, masculine laugh followed. Cold, even for you, Blackwood. The Duchess is lovely. Surely there is some warmth behind closed doors. Lovely, yes. Warmth has nothing to do with it. She was a duty I accepted. I provide, she behaves. That is the whole of it. Eveline Ashford, Duchess of Blackwood, did not move. She did not gasp. She simply stood there, letting the words sink into her skin like winter rain. 6 months of marriage. 6 months of hoping that the distant, silver-eyed man she had loved from afar since her first London season might one day look at her as something more than a responsibility. And now she knew. She had always been nothing but an arrangement, a signature on a contract, a duty. She had come to return a book of poetry he had once mentioned he admired. She had marked a passage she thought he might like, a small, hopeful bridge between them. The book suddenly felt heavy and foolish in her hands. She turned silently, her satin slippers making no sound on the floor, and walked back through the endless, shadowed corridors of Thornwood Hall. Not a single tear fell. That would come later in the privacy of her own chambers, when the fire had died and the darkness could swallow her whole. But in that hallway, she simply felt something inside her quietly close, like a door shutting forever. The next morning, Eveline rose early and dressed without ringing for her maid. She chose a gown of pale gray, not the deep sapphire that brought out her eyes. The color her husband had once absently remarked was pleasant enough. She left her hair simple, pinned low at her nape, and went down to breakfast. Alexander was already seated at the long mahogany table, a newspaper in one hand, coffee in the other. He glanced up, nodded once, and returned to his reading. That was their morning ritual. She would sit, pour her tea, and they would share the room in complete silence. Today she did not pour the tea. She did not sit. She walked past the table toward the garden door. "You are not breakfasting," his voice stopped her, low, unhurried, as if he were asking about the weather. "I find I am not hungry, Your Grace." Her own voice surprised her, steady, calm. There was a pause, a rustle of newsprint. "You look pale, you should eat." "I thank you for your concern," she replied, and stepped into the gray morning light. He did not follow. Eveline walked the long gravel path to the neglected section of the garden, where overgrown roses tangled with wild lavender. She had always loved this forgotten corner. It felt honest. No one had pruned it into perfect, unnatural shapes. She sat on a stone bench still damp with dew and let the ache settle deeper into her bones. She had loved Alexander Blackwood for 2 years before they married. She had first seen him at a ball, standing apart from the crowd, his expression unreadable, his presence like a quiet storm. She had not dared to approach him then, but she had watched him all night, and by morning she had written a letter she never meant to send. A foolish, heartfelt letter in which she confessed her admiration. She had tucked it into a book of poetry and hidden it away. And then, out of nowhere, the Duke of Blackwood had offered for her hand. Her father's debts were suffocating. The estate was crumbling. Alexander's proposal had been a miracle. She had dared to believe that perhaps, somehow, he had seen her, remembered her, wanted her. But on their wedding night he had been polite and distant. He had kissed her forehead and retreated to his own rooms, and he had never once spoken a word of affection. Now she understood why. Duty. She stayed in the garden for an hour, letting the cold seep into her skirts. When she finally returned to the house, she found her husband's steward in the entrance hall, a thin, meticulous man named Mr. Collins. He bowed as she passed. "Your Grace, I have placed the ledgers you requested in the morning room, the orphanage accounts, and the charity fund reports." She nodded. "Thank you, Collins. I shall review them directly." In the first months of her marriage, she had tried to fill her days with small, hopeful gestures for Alexander. She had learned his favorite foods, had ordered his study clean just so, had worn gowns in colors she thought he might prefer. None of it had mattered. Now she would fill her days with something else, a purpose that did not depend on his notice. She spent the entire afternoon in the morning room, poring over numbers, drafting letters, and planning improvements for the small orphanage on the edge of the estate that had been neglected for years. The work was absorbing, demanding, and blessedly quiet. No one interrupted her. No one missed her. By evening, she had a complete plan for new dormitories and a proper schoolroom, all within the budget she had been granted as a marriage settlement. For the first time in months, she felt a tiny, fragile spark of something that was not pain. The dinner bell rang at 7. Eveline hesitated before going down. The thought of sitting across from Alexander, of passing the salt and pretending to be content, felt like a wound she could not bear to prod again. But she went. She was the Duchess of Blackwood. She would not hide. Dinner was a quiet affair. The long table stretched between them, candlelight flickering on silver. Alexander ate methodically, his gaze distant. Halfway through the meal, he spoke. "I am told you spent the day with the orphanage Ledgers." "Yes." "Is there a particular reason?" She set down her fork and met his eyes. They were the color of a winter sky, beautiful and unreachable. "I thought I might make myself useful. The children need better bedding and a proper teacher. I would like to oversee the improvements personally." He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "If it pleases you." "It does." He returned to his meal. She returned to her silence. But something had shifted in the air between them, though she could not name it. Over the following weeks, Eveline poured herself into the orphanage. She visited daily, her carriage bumping down the rutted lane to the old stone building. She hired a young, bright-eyed governess named Miss Clara Thorne, a woman of gentle manners and fierce intelligence. She ordered fabric for new curtains, blankets, and simple dresses. She read to the children herself, her voice soft in the dusty common room, and she learned their names one by one. There was a boy called Tom with a limp and a fierce love for horses. A little girl named Daisy who drew flowers on every scrap of paper she found. They began to watch for the Duchess's carriage with eager faces, and something inside Eveline began to thaw, not toward her husband, but toward herself. Alexander noticed her absences. He said nothing at first, but one evening he appeared in the doorway of her private sitting room, where she was writing letters by candlelight. She had not heard him approach. He rarely came to this part of the house. "You were not at dinner," he said. It was not an accusation, but it was not indifferent either. "I was delayed at the orphanage. I ate in the kitchens with the children." She did not look up from her letter. A pause. "You ate in the kitchens." "They have a very good cook, far less formal than the hall." She allowed a small smile, though her heart was beating too fast. "The children find the dining room here intimidating, I think, so I joined them." He said nothing for a long moment. Then quietly, "You have been away a great deal." "I have been where I am useful." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she saw something flicker in his silver eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or something sharper. "Eveline." "Good night, Alexander." She rose, gathered her letters, and left the room without looking back. Her heart pounded, but she felt a fierce, painful pride. She had not waited for his dismissal. She had not lingered, hopping for a crumb of attention. She had simply walked away. That night she lay awake staring at the canopy above her bed, and she did not cry. She was too tired for tears. The love she had carried for him was still there, buried deep, but it was no longer something she would offer on open hands. She would guard it, starve it if she must, until it no longer had the power to wound her. Spring arrived, and with it came a visitor to Thornwood Hall. Lord Nathaniel Ashby was the Duke's cousin, a man of easy smiles and sun-streaked hair, who had spent years traveling the continent painting portraits and charming every drawing room from Paris to Vienna. He was nothing like Alexander. Where the Duke was winter, Nathaniel was high summer. He arrived with a leather satchel full of sketchbooks, a laugh that echoed off the walls, and an immediate, unguarded friendliness that disarmed the entire household. At dinner that first evening, Nathaniel turned the full warmth of his attention on Evelyn. "Cousin, you have been keeping secrets. I expected a quiet, retiring duchess, and instead I find a woman who has single-handedly revived an orphanage. I am in awe." Evelyn flushed, a genuine blush she had not felt in a very long time. "You exaggerate, my lord." "Not at all. I should like to see it, and to sketch some of the children if you would permit. There is nothing so honest as a child's face." He smiled at her, and it was impossible not to smile back. Alexander watched the exchange from the head of the table, his fingers tight around the stem of his wine glass. He said nothing, but his eyes followed the easy conversation between his wife and his cousin with a stillness that was almost predatory. When Evelyn laughed softly at one of Nathaniel's stories, Alexander set his glass down with a small, sharp click that only he noticed. The next day, Nathaniel accompanied her to the orphanage. He was as good as his word, pulling out a worn sketchbook and capturing the children in quick, lively lines. Tom was drawn astride an imaginary horse. Daisy was surrounded by a field of floating flowers. The children adored him. Evelyn found herself relaxing in his presence in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. He did not expect formality. He did not measure her worth by duty. He simply talked and listened and made her feel, for a few stolen hours, like a woman rather than a title. They returned to the hall in the late afternoon, their voices carrying through the grand entrance. Nathaniel was describing a mishap with a gondola in Venice, and Evelyn was laughing, her cheeks pink from the sun and the exertion of the day. She looked up and saw Alexander standing at the top of the staircase, his expression carved from stone. He did not descend. He simply watched them for a long, weighted moment, then turned and walked away. The days that followed were thick with unspoken tension. Nathaniel continued his visits to the orphanage, always with the Duke's permission, always with impeccable propriety. But Alexander's mood grew darker. He was curt at meals. He spent longer hours shut in his study. He began to watch Evelyn with a new, sharp intensity that she did not understand. Once she caught him staring at her across the drawing room while she sorted through a box of donated books, and the look in his eyes was so raw, so unguarded, that she forgot to breathe. Then he blinked, and the mask slid back into place. She did not chase him. She did not ask what was wrong. She had learned her lesson. Instead, she began to withdraw even further. She stopped attending the formal dinners when Nathaniel was not present, citing fatigue. She took her breakfast in her rooms. She no longer lingered in the hallway near his study in the foolish hope of a chance encounter. She filled her hours with work, and the work gave her a new kind of strength. She was becoming someone who did not need Alexander Blackwood's love to survive. And it was killing him. One evening, a fortnight after Nathaniel's arrival, Evelyn was in the library, searching for a book on child education that Miss Thorne had recommended. The room was empty, the fire low, the shadows deep. She was standing on a small ladder, her fingers brushing the spines, when the door opened and Alexander walked in. He stopped when he saw her. "Forgive me, I did not know you were here." His voice was rougher than usual. "I am only looking for a book. I will not be long." She did not climb down. He did not leave. He walked closer, stopping at the foot of the ladder. "You have been avoiding me." Evelyn's hand stilled on a leather-bound volume. "I have been occupied." "Occupied?" He repeated the word as if it tasted bitter. "You spend every waking hour with my cousin. You laugh with him, you ride with him. You look at him as if—" "As if what?" She finally turned to face him, her heart hammering, her voice dangerously calm. "As if he were the sun, and I the shadow," Alexander said, and the words seemed torn from somewhere deep inside him. She climbed down the ladder slowly, her skirts rustling in the silence. "You have never wanted my attention, Your Grace. You made that very clear. I am only giving you what you have always asked for: distance." His jaw tightened. "I never asked for this." "You did not have to ask. You simply never reached for me." She walked past him toward the door, but his hand caught her wrist. It was not a rough grip, but it was unyielding. She stopped, her pulse fluttering under his fingers. "Evelyn." Her name was a plea and a warning all at once. "Please." She looked down at his hand, then up into his eyes. "Let me go, Alexander. You have no right to hold me now." He released her as if burned. She walked out of the library and did not look back, even as she heard something fragile shatter behind her, the sound of a book or a heart, she could not tell. That night the storm came. It was a wild, roaring tempest that shook the ancient walls of Thornwood Hall and sent branches lashing against the windows. Evelyn lay in her bed, listening to the wind howl, and felt a strange, restless energy coursing through her. She could not sleep. She rose, pulled on a dressing gown, and drifted through the dark house like a ghost. She found herself in the East Wing, a part of the hall she rarely visited. It was where Alexander's mother had lived before her death, and the rooms had been kept closed for years. A single door stood ajar. Flickering candlelight seeped through the crack. She should have turned back. She should have respected the boundaries of the past. But something drew her forward, some pull she could not resist, and she pushed the door open. It was a small, dusty sitting room. An old portrait of a stern, elegant woman hung above the fireplace, and on the desk beneath it a wooden box sat open, its contents half spilled. Evelyn moved closer, her candle held high, and her breath caught in her throat. The box was full of letters, letters in her own handwriting, letters she had never sent, letters she had hidden in a book of poetry years ago and never seen again. They were all here, tied with a faded blue ribbon, and on top of the bundle lay a single, unopened note addressed to Alexander in a hand she recognized as his mother. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the note. "My son, the Ashford girl, is beneath you. I have intercepted her foolish declaration. She seeks only your title. Forget her. The debts of her family will be paid by another. Do not lower yourself." The room spun around her. Evelyn sank into the chair, the paper shaking in her hands. His mother had hidden her letter. The letter she had written after that first ball, the one she had poured her heart into, and then, in a moment of wild courage, hidden in a book she thought he might one day find. She had never known it had been taken. She had married him believing he had ignored her feelings, when in truth he had never received them. And deeper, buried beneath the ribbon, she found a folded document she did not recognize. She opened it with numb fingers. It was a record of payment, a massive sum transferred years ago to her father's creditors. The date was months before Alexander had proposed. The signature was his. He had not married her out of duty. He had not been forced. He had saved her family in secret, long before any arrangement was made, and then he had come for her. He had loved her first. The storm raged outside, but inside Evelyn's chest, a different storm was breaking. She gathered the letters, the note, the document, and she rose from the chair with a purpose she had not felt in months. She did not care about the hour. She did not care about propriety. She needed to know the truth. She found Alexander in his study. He was standing by the window, staring out at the lightning-split sky, his back to the door. He did not turn when she entered. "I heard you moving about," he said, his voice hollow. "You should be asleep." She did not answer. Instead, she crossed the room and laid the bundle of letters on the desk. The rustle of paper made him turn. When he saw what she had placed there, all the color drained from his face. "Where did you find those?" His voice was barely a whisper. "In your mother's rooms. She kept them. She kept my letter, Alexander. The one I wrote after I first saw you. She never gave it to you." Her voice broke on the last word, and she pressed her hand to her mouth to steady herself. He stared at the letters as if they were ghosts. "You wrote to me. I loved you. I loved you before we ever spoke. I thought you knew. I thought you simply did not care." He took a step toward her, then stopped, his hands clenched at his sides. "I never received any letter. I never knew." She held up the document. "And this. You paid my father's debts before you proposed. Why? If it was duty, there were easier ways. Why would you do this unless?" The silence stretched between them, thick and unbearable. Lightning flared, illuminating the agony on his face. "Because I loved you," he said, and the words came out rough, as if they had been locked away for years and had grown rusted and painful. "I saw you at that same ball. You wore pale green and you laughed at something your friend said, and I could not look away. I watched you all night. I learned your name. I learned of your family's trouble. I could not bear to see you suffer, so I paid the debts anonymously. I swore I would only approach you when I could offer you a life without shame. I waited. I planned. And when I finally came to your father with a proposal, you accepted so quietly, so obediently. I thought you were only doing your duty. I thought you had no feeling for me at all." Tears were streaming down Evelyn's face, now hot and silent. "All this time, we have been strangers because of her, because of a stolen letter." Alexander crossed the distance between them and cupped her face in his hands, his touch achingly gentle. "I have been a fool. I was so afraid of forcing my love on a woman who did not want it that I gave you nothing. I gave you coldness and silence, and I watched you drift away, and it was worse than any pain I have ever known. When I saw you laugh with Nathaniel, I thought I would go mad. I wanted to tear the world apart. Because you were mine, and I had never told you, and I had no right to be jealous, but I was. I am. Evelyn, I love you. I have loved you for years. I am so sorry I made you feel like a duty." She closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. The pain of the past months was still there, but beneath it something new was stirring, hope, fragile and trembling. "I stopped hopping," she whispered. "I stopped waiting for you. I thought if I made myself useful elsewhere, the emptiness would go away, but it never did. I will spend the rest of my life filling that emptiness," he said, his forehead pressed to hers. "If you will let me, if it is not too late." She opened her eyes and looked into his. The winter was gone from them. There was only a desperate, burning tenderness. She reached up and covered his hands with her own. "It is not too late," she said, "but you must promise me something." "Anything." "No more silence, no more masks. If we are to heal, we must be honest even when it hurts." "I swear it," he breathed. "I swear it on everything I am." And there, in the storm-lit study, with the letters of a lost love scattered on the desk and the rain lashing the windows like applause, Alexander Blackwood kissed his wife for the first time, not as a duty, but as a devotion. It was a kiss of apology and promise, of years of longing finally released. Evelyn let herself fall into it, her fingers tangling in his hair, her heart cracking open to let the light back in. They did not speak again that night. They did not need to. They simply held each other as the storm raged and then slowly, gently began to fade. By dawn, the sky was washed clean and a pale, golden light crept over the estate. Evelyn stood with Alexander at the window, wrapped in his coat, his arm around her shoulders, and watched the world come back to life. The healing was not instantaneous. There were still long conversations in the days that followed, quiet confessions, moments of old doubt that had to be soothed with patience and touch. Alexander told her about his mother's manipulation, about the cold household in which he had been raised, about the fear that had made him lock his heart away. Evelyn told him about the night she had heard him call her a duty, and he flinched as if struck, pulling her close and whispering apologies until she silenced him with a kiss. Nathaniel, good-hearted and perceptive, saw the change between them and quietly made plans to continue his travels. Before he left, he pressed a small sketch into Evelyn's hands. It was a portrait of Alexander, drawn from memory, his expression soft, his eyes full of an emotion Nathaniel had never seen on his cousin's face before. "He has loved you since the beginning," Nathaniel said simply. "I am glad he finally found the courage to show it." Evelyn hung the sketch in the orphanage common room, where the children could see it. It became a symbol of quiet, steadfast love, the kind that endured mistakes and misunderstandings and came out stronger on the other side. The orphanage flourished. The dormitories were built, the schoolroom filled with laughter. Tom learned to ride a gentle pony Alexander brought from the stables. Daisy's drawings covered an entire wall, and the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood became a familiar sight there together, side by side, their hands often brushing as they walked the gravel paths. One evening, months later, they stood in the overgrown rose garden where Evelyn had once sat alone with her shattered hopes. Alexander had pruned it himself, carefully, tenderly, and the first new blooms were beginning to open in the twilight. "I have something for you," he said, and drew a folded paper from his coat. It was a letter, yellowed with age, in his own handwriting. "I wrote this the night before our wedding. I was too much of a coward to give it to you. I think it is time you read it." Evelyn unfolded it with trembling hands and read words of such raw, aching love that tears spilled down her cheeks before she reached the end. He had written of his hopes, his fears, his desperate desire to be worthy of her. He had called her his sunlight, his peace, his unexpected miracle. And at the bottom, in a slightly shakier hand, he had written, "If you ever find this, know that I have loved you longer than you can imagine." She looked up at him, her vision blurred. "You kept it all this time." "I could never throw it away. It was the truest thing I ever wrote." He took her hand and pressed it to his heart. "Evelyn, you walked away in silence because I gave you no reason to stay, but you came back, and I will never, ever let you go again." She smiled, that beautiful, radiant smile he had first fallen in love with across a crowded ballroom. "I am not going anywhere, Alexander. I am exactly where I belong." He kissed her then, as the roses nodded in the evening breeze and the first star appeared in the darkening sky. It was not a kiss of storm and desperation, but of calm, deep, abiding peace. The peace of two hearts that had finally, against all odds, found their way home. The story of the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood did not end with grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It continued in the quiet moments, the shared morning tea, the books read aloud by the fire, the sound of their joined laughter echoing through the halls that had once been so cold. It continued in the orphanage, where they went every week, and where the children called them Uncle Alexander and Aunt Evelyn. It continued in the little things, a hand held in a carriage, a note left on a pillow, a look across a crowded room that said everything without a single word. And it continued in the way they rebuilt their love, brick by brick, on a foundation of honesty and forgiveness. They never forgot the pain they had caused each other, but they used it as a reminder to always, always speak the truth. Because silence, they had learned, was the most dangerous distance of all. Years later, when a new generation of children asked Daisy, now a grown woman and the orphanage's art teacher, about the sketch on the wall, she would smile and say, "That is the Duke who learned that love is not a duty. It is a choice. And he chose her, every single day for the rest of his life." And in Thornwood Hall, in a garden full of roses, an old man with silver hair would sit beside a woman with gentle eyes, his hand wrapped around hers, and he would tell her, just as he did every evening, "I loved you too late, but I love you now with all the time I have left." She would lean her head on his shoulder and reply, "You were never too late. You were always exactly the love I was waiting for." And the sun would set, and the stars would rise, and the world would turn around them, and it was beautiful. It was, at last, enough.